Welcome to Shellfish Soundbites, where we dive into Long Island's relationship with oysters. In the next 20 minutes, join us on a journey as we hear from artists, farmers, scientists, and community members. Discover why these remarkable mollusks hold a special place in the heart of Long Island's culture.
Oysters, oysters, come and graze, the bay is grey with oysters. Break 'em up and take 'em home, grill them, roast 'em, let 'em fry. Make yourself an oyster pie, hoist 'em raw, they're moist and slimy, and you'll enjoy her. Come and get your oysters.
This first photo shows just one of the reasons I began using oyster shells to create art. Each one has a unique size, shape, color, and texture, making it the perfect one-of-a-kind gift. Many of my clients use them as jewelry dishes, tablescaping, wedding place settings, and pretty coastal decor, all collected from the local waters right here in my backyard, Montauk, New York. Here in the next two photos, you can see how rough and raw the shells I collect start out. The process begins here with a very labor-intensive system of soaking, cleaning, scrubbing, followed by many sun baths for sometimes even months. Here, they are arranged and organized depending on the project. These were prepped and ready for a beautiful coastal wedding place setting project for a wedding at the Crow's Nest here in Montauk. Here, you see the gorgeous end results after decoupaging and sealing my oyster shells. This particular photo is my very first collaboration with a local artist and friend, Rhonda Deland. I experimented with the most effective way to add her paintings into the oyster shells, and we could not be happier with the results. This pretty blue octopus shell was one of my first designs 2 years ago. I love the fluidity of the design as well as its meaningful connection to the ocean, a perfect match. I wanted to share a finished wedding project here just to show that the shells can also be organic, raw, and beautiful on their own. Sometimes just the simplicity of Mother Nature is pure beauty. I also try to incorporate a bit of coastal photography into my art as shown here, a stunning piece using the flat side of the bivalve. My last photo is one of my favorites. This is an enormous pile of cured oyster shells that's ready to be bagged and used for a shell restoration project led by Back to the Bays, an initiative of Cornell Cooperative Extension. I had a chance to volunteer at this Shelter Island site this past summer. We shoveled hundreds of shells into net bags that would be used for spat-on-shell reef restoration. My experience here led me to an even deeper passion for oyster shells, as I learned an incredible amount of information about them. Not only how they function, but why they are so incredibly important to our coastal environment. I am certain that I will continue to be inspired by my love for oyster shells, by using Mother Nature and my environment as my guide.
During my childhood, my mother passed on her love of collecting shells to me. In turn, I shared this tradition with my son. Every summer, we spent countless hours combing the beach for treasures on vacation. During the pandemic, my husband and I decided to leave New York City after 20 plus years and make the move to Long Island. Now that we live right on the water, shell collecting has become a year-round hobby. My discovery of decoupage led me to turn our shells into handcrafted treasures, and She Shells Designs was launched in the fall of 2021. All of our shells are local to Long Island, from the North Shore to the Hamptons. Spending so much time on the water has certainly highlighted issues like the fact that large scallops are no longer prevalent here. We've also become very aware of the water quality. As a family, we were involved in oyster gardening in Hempstead Harbor this summer. 60,000 oysters were recently planted, and we're excited to monitor the process as these oysters grow and continue to help improve the water. I'm always excited to share my love of shells with new customers and hope our designs help to bring sandy memories into people's homes.
Pictured here is a freshly shucked oyster from one of my favorite oyster bars, Little Creek Oysters, located in Greenport, New York. This is a favorite place of mine to gather with friends and family to shuck a pile of oysters while drinking craft beer that was brewed by a local brewery. As the manager of the Marine Sciences Center at Stony Brook University, I work with many researchers that are working hard to restore oysters throughout Long Island. This work is not only important to creating healthy marine environments, but it is also a boost to the local economy. Oysters keep our waters clean, and clean water equals more maritime tourism. Oyster farms produce jobs. These farms then supply fresh, locally sourced oysters to restaurants and seafood markets. So I'd like to raise a toast to the hardworking men and women who are bringing oysters back to Long Island.
As oyster farmers, we have to be out on the water every day. Once we decide that we're going to make deliveries, we can't tell a restaurant we're not making deliveries. It's a challenge, but it's also very rewarding because we know we're doing something good. It's also great for these young people to start in a business where they can take control of doing something that is meaningful and outside. Many people don't want to work in an office or follow a linear path, and this gives them a choice to make a difference in their own lives, build something, build a better future for themselves and perhaps soon a family. There really is no barrier to entry unless you just have a willingness to pursue a dream and a passion. We are providing a great source of protein to many restaurants and to the fish markets around the world. This can be something that is sustainable and renewable for our planet. In this photo, Grady is bringing a bag of oysters to a delivery, and it's challenging because people don't realize how good oysters are, and our future truly is dependent on shellfish and seaweed and rejuvenating the oceans. We are at an oyster festival at the Greenport Brewery, and so many people came from New York City, from around the island, and everyone's just happy and drinking local beer and eating local oysters. And we did the shell restoration, so people were learning about that, and it just brought a lot of really good people together. The challenges are we have to do a lot of prep for this with the DEC and making sure all our permits are in order and have enough oysters to serve the public and make it worth our while to have all the farmers off the water for the day and working at these oyster festivals. For the second community building, that is called the Shellabration, and that's also in Greenport, and that brings people out to Greenport to celebrate the local restaurants who have specials on all the oysters, and it raises money for the Cornell Spat Research and Restoration Group, and that was a lot of fun to be a part of.
This photo shows my own oyster farm, Shellworks, in Little Peconic Bay, Southampton, in its beginning days. As if working with shellfish full-time as director of East Hampton Shellfish Hatchery isn't enough, I've always wanted my own farm to provide fresh local oysters to the public on the South Fork of Long Island. The idea is also to teach my kids a bit about oyster farming by having them work on the farm. It has also given them the chance to learn a lot about the other things that live in and around the cages, because every cage pulled up reveals some other treats that are using the cages as habitat. Every cage houses young blackfish, black sea bass, oyster toadfish, eels, sculpin, gobies, and or grass shrimp. This opportunity exists thanks to the Suffolk County Aquaculture Lease Program and the folks at the Department of Economic Development and Planning that put years of effort into developing the program. Otherwise, the only opportunity would have been via underwater grants, which are owned and hard to come by, or by working with the town trustees to establish areas in the harbors within individual towns on the East End. This is just a photo of green water. Why? Well, it sounds cheesy, but I tell everyone that I talk to about growing shellfish and our local waters out here that green water is good water. This green water is full of good food for shellfish and other low trophic level creatures. We don't want this water to be brown, rusty, or red. Those would be signs of harmful algae blooms or runoff from a storm which introduces contaminants from the upland. Oyster farming, as well as stock enhancement programs like East Hampton Town's Shellfish Hatchery, help to maintain this green water by seeding millions of filter feeding shellfish annually, which help maintain or increase water quality by grazing on the harmful algae species and keeping them from blooming, as well as sequestering excess nutrients like nitrogen, carbon, and phosphorus. Without the introduction and maintenance of shellfish into our waters, there would be less and less of this good green water, more of the harmful red, rusty, and brown water. The latter makes our waters less swimmable and fishable, which would negatively affect our economy by affecting tourism and fisheries. This is a photo of an oyster reef in Accabonac Harbor, East Hampton. This photo could truly speak 1,000 words. It encompasses so many good things about oysters: stock enhancement, education, water quality, habitat creation, and shoreline stabilization. This is the first oyster reef constructed in East Hampton trustee waters. It was coordinated by the East Hampton Shellfish Hatchery and South Fork Sea Farmers. It was completed with the assistance of high schoolers from East Hampton and 6th graders from Spring School. Many other volunteers were also involved in bagging the shell used to construct the reef and maintaining them until they were deployed in September 2022. As we know, other oyster reefs provide critical habitat and otherwise virtual deserts, which represent the bottoms of many of our harbors since the disappearance of eelgrass in the mid-1980s. As the oysters grow, they will be filtering the waters at a rate of about 50 gallons per adult oyster per day, and hopefully spawning to create more natural recruitment of oysters on this reef and substrate beyond.
This photograph shows me opening oysters and plating them on a tin. I'm getting ready to serve my customers beautiful, delicious oysters. This photograph is a picture of my heritage, and it concerns the well-being of oysters and the existence of them through a sustainable agricultural theme. It can be strengthened by spawning and placing the oysters in an environment that's controlled and in an environment in the wild, so we can always have them to harvest and to feed people in the public. And we can strengthen this by supplying the proper people information and allowing more agricultural programs to the state of New York.
This photo shows a picture of me out taking my oyster garden in from the water to grab some oysters and also to clean the cage. This is what got me started on this whole process. I began oyster gardening about 2 years before I retired, about 2 years ago. And I just started to learn about oysters, what they could do, and then started researching their natural process, how they existed before oyster gardening, and began working with the town who promotes this oyster gardening project. And from that grew something which is more than a hobby, a passion with me now, to start to get as many oyster reefs into local harbors as possible to filter the water. There was a time when oyster reefs were pretty much ubiquitous around Long Island. They were kind of a keystone species in the entire ecosystem. And natural oyster reefs, to my knowledge, do not exist on Long Island anymore. The Billion Oyster Project in New York City is looking to do, on a much larger scale, the same thing there. And there's also the Murch's Bay Project, Shinnecock Bay Project, where they're trying similar techniques to use natural processes to help clean the waters in the bays. So we're following those models and trying to do what we can in East Hampton. Photograph number 2 shows 2 student interns that are working with the nonprofit, the South Fork Sea Farmers, in that same bay, very close to where that first picture was taken, sitting on top of a newly constructed oyster reef that they and their colleagues from the local high school built with the help of the South Fork Sea Farmers. There are about 500 bags of shell there, the bottom layer being shell with only just shells, and the second layer being what's called spat on shell. So small oysters growing on other oyster shells, clam shells, and put in mesh bags. These mesh bags are biodegradable. So in 2 years, we will have basically an oyster reef as it would be in nature, with just shells and oysters growing on those shells, which is the natural way it would happen. And if we can get enough of these reefs throughout Accabonac Harbor, hopefully when they spawn, we'll have enough of a density that will start to get natural set. So larvae will start to stick to the shells on the reef, and we'll have a natural growing oyster reef. And that will do a fantastic job in filtering the water. Each oyster filtering about 50 gallons of water a day. The problem, of course, is the same, the pollution, the nitrates. But what's exciting about this photo and some subsequent photos is the commitment of the younger generation to environmental activism. I've always frustrated by the fact that most of the things I know about the environment now that are going wrong, global warming, acidification, nitrates in the water, all of this I was taught in high school. And that was many, many, many moons ago, 50 years ago. And these things have been out there as known problems that would only get worse. And my generation has done, I can't say nothing, but not enough. So I'm hopeful that this next generation can do better than we did.
This is a photograph of a hard clam, also known as Mercenaria. We had just raked it and pulled it from the bay. So what's really happening in this photograph is this is people learning where clams live, having never really thought about it before. They were out in the bay and getting an education. As a member of Calamity Janes, it's part of our mission to educate people about the ecosystems out here and on the North Fork. The strength exists in education and letting people understand how clams grow and what their role is in the ecosystem. And then that generates more appreciation, and we believe a higher chance that people will do more to protect the ecosystem.
This is our measuring system for the oysters. Now they're about toward the end of the season. They're growing. They're about 3 centimeters or 30 millimeters long on average. So we have all of our junior sailors and our adults measure the oysters, record them, and they also count how many oysters are on each shell. So this represents to me true growth, true health of the oysters, how they're really working within the water, cleaning our waters. And it's amazing to see the growth in such a short period of time. That's something that really engages everybody in this area. So it's an exciting photo. It's something that the strength for the program, this is our second year in a row, so it's really successful. And we're really beginning to see the oysters grow and thrive.
Now it's your turn. Here you'll find 2 options to share your own stories and responses to the exhibition. Use these paper cards for written responses and then slip them into the accompanying box. There is also an iPad story booth to record your story. Both options have guiding questions, but they're just a starting point. Your story can take its own path, and while there are many important shellfish species, our spotlight is on oysters and understanding how they're woven into our lives. If you would like to include a photograph with your story submission, email your image to us, and responses will be displayed on our virtual exhibition hosted on our website.
Oysters, oysters, grab your knife, don't just smudge your fingers. Reap a deep cup from the pail, shuck till stuck, twist your wrist to open what the oceans kiss. Slurp your little piece of blisters, form to anoint her when she's shucking oysters.